Imagine for a second, right, that you are a burnt out modern supply chain optimizer. You work 16 hours a day staring at spreadsheets under these flickering fluorescent lights, just optimizing global freight routes until your vision literally
Oh
blurs.
man, living the corporate dream.
Exactly. But then suddenly, you feel the floor fall away. The air shifts from the smell of stale coffee and printer ozone to like the heavy scent of frankincense and blood.
Just a massive sensory shock.
Right. You open your eyes and you are standing in a medieval fantasy world.
It's the ultimate fish out of water scenario,
Yeah.
but in this case with a highly specific, highly analytical fish.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. We are jumping into this incredible interactive fiction transcript where a modern protagonist who goes by Aurelion Dawnstar gets summoned to the kingdom of Oakhaven.
And Oakhaven is essentially collapsing.
Completely collapsing. He gets pulled there by this desperate 35-year-old dowager queen named Alara. The king is dead, under highly suspicious circumstances.
Very suspicious, yeah.
And the heir is this 18-year-old prince named Julian, who is basically a poet. He's considered way too soft to rule by the High Council, and that council is actively plotting a violent takeover. So Queen Alara is trying to summon a savior.
But, she doesn't get a paladin with a glowing sword. She gets a logistics expert.
And that is what makes this entire narrative so gripping for us. Aurelian looks around the room, he assesses the political collapse happening right in front of him, and he realizes the most powerful weapon in a feudal society isn't magic. It's a spreadsheet.
Right, he treats the entire kingdom exactly like a hostile corporate takeover.
Exactly. He isn't a knight in shining armor. He is an aggressive turnaround CEO dropped into a failing, incredibly bloody startup. For anyone listening who loves systems thinking, this is a masterclass.
It really is. And the parallel to a turnaround CEO is just strikingly accurate because the very first thing any turnaround CEO has to do is secure the runway.
Yeah.
You have to, stop the company from bleeding out on day one.
Right. Immediate crisis management. Because when Aurelian arrives, Oakhaven is in critical condition. The royal treasury is physically locked down by this corrupt High Chancellor, Lord Varick. The royal guards haven't been paid in 2 months.
2 whole months, yeah. Armed men with no pay.
And on top of that, there is a massive winter grain shortage looming that threatens to starve the entire capital. So he has zero capital, an armed force ready to mutiny, and an impending famine.
A traditional hero would, go slay a dragon to steal its hoard
Sure.
or go on a quest for a magical artifact.
Right, some magical cornucopia. But Aurelian, he just uses modern economics. He addresses the guards first, right? He knows he can't pay them in gold because Varick has the vault locked up tight.
So he invents government bonds literally on the spot.
It's amazing. He pays the guards in these promissory warrants backed by the future revenue of royal lands.
We really need to pause and look at the underlying mechanics of that move. Because in a medieval setting, unpaid guards are not a loyal military force. They are heavily armed mercenaries just waiting for a better offer from that corrupt High Council.
Yep.
By paying them in promissory warrants, Aurelian isn't just handing out IOUs, he is tethering their personal, financial survival directly to his new system.
Wait, I have to push back on this a bit, because if I go up to a medieval mercenary and say, hey, I can't give you gold, but here's a piece of paper that says I'll pay you next year, that mercenary is going to stab me.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, he is essentially printing fiat currency out of thin air. It feels like an incredibly fragile house of cards. He's betting that the kingdom won't collapse, and he's forcing men with swords to make that exact same bet.
You are touching on the core risk of the strategy there. But you're missing the leverage he applies. He doesn't just hand them blank paper. He backs it with tangible royal land revenue that they can physically go out and see.
Okay, that makes it a bit more real for them.
And more importantly, he creates this massive collective action problem for the guards. If one guard rejects the paper and rebels, sure, he might get a little stolen gold. But if the whole system falls, all the other guards lose all their newly acquired wealth.
Oh, wow, so they police themselves.
Exactly. Aurelian turns the guards into stakeholders. They instantly shift their allegiance away from the abstract concept of the crown and directly to him, the architect of their financial future.
He turns a potential military coup into an impenetrable wall of loyalty overnight.
Yes, but, what about the famine? You can't eat promissory warrants.
Right, the grain shortage. For that, he applies the exact same concept of leveraged futures. He locks the kingdom's grain guilds into these massive futures contracts.
Because he knows exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, he commits to buying 40% of their current stock immediately at a fixed price, strictly 5% above the 3-year average. In exchange, he grants them future trade monopolies for the upcoming spring.
He basically prices the famine out of existence.
Completely. He knows the merchants are hoarding the grain to artificially inflate prices as the winter gets worse, right? By offering them a guaranteed, slightly above average payout right now, plus a monopoly later, he removes all their incentive to hoard.
He gives them a profitable, guaranteed future that they are suddenly terrified to lose. He uses their own greed to stabilize the food supply.
But like you said, this is just securing the runway. It's a tourniquet.
Yeah, the stabilization is temporary. To actually fix the patient, Aurelion has to deal with the source of the rot. He has to deal with High Chancellor Lord Varric, the guy actually holding the keys to the physical gold.
And this is where the dynamic of the story really shifts. You have a modern man going up against a super powerful, entrenched medieval lord. But Aurelion doesn't draw a weapon. He demands a routine fiscal review.
The silent audit. It's genuinely terrifying to read.
It really is. Aurelion gets his hands on the ledgers, and his modern brain runs a pattern recognition sweep that a medieval mind just couldn't possibly comprehend.
Because to a medieval lord, a ledger is just a list of numbers. But to a modern supply chain optimizer, a ledger is a living map of human behavior.
Right. And he instantly spots the corruption through pure variance analysis. He finds what he calls the phantom guard loop. So Varric is paying the wages for 200 men at the border forts, but he's only requisitioning grain and boot replacements for 120.
He's pocketing the salaries of 80 ghost soldiers.
Exactly. And Aurelion doesn't just look at the totals, he cross-references the data streams. He looks at this spoilage spike. Standard agricultural write-offs for rat damage and rot in this era, they should be around 3 to 5%.
But Varric's ledgers show a consistent 12% loss.
Yeah, because Varric is stealing the other 7% and blaming it on very hungry rats.
Huge rats.
Right. And then Aurelion finds the delayed ledger scam, where tax money is collected from the provinces but recorded as arriving 3 weeks late. Varric is using that 3-week window to lend the crown's own money out at high interest.
He keeps the profit and then finally deposits the principal. It is an absolute masterclass in forensic accounting. Aurelion maps out Varric's entire life of embezzlement with clinical, undeniable precision.
But this is where I totally expected the story to take a traditional fantasy turn.
Really? How so?
Well, Aurelion has the irrefutable proof, right? And he has the newly loyal royal guards standing literally right outside the door. My immediate thought is, arrest Varric. Execute him for treason in the public square. Off with his head. That is how you establish dominance in a feudal society.
That is how you establish fear, yeah. But fear without infrastructure is brittle.
What do you mean?
If we apply Aurelion's cold logic here, we see why execution is actually a failure of imagination. He views execution as a one-time expenditure of a resource. Once a man is dead, he's gone, and now you have to train a completely new chancellor from scratch.
Oh, I see.
But extorted loyalty,
Yeah.
a highly competent administrator who is absolutely terrified of you. That is a renewable asset.
And he doesn't even yell at the guy. He just quietly slides this massive ledger back across the table to Varric, taps the anomalies, and casually mentions that he suspects these unfortunate clerical errors and rat infestations will miraculously resolve themselves within 48 hours.
He gives Varric a simple binary choice. Fix the holes in the budget out of your own pocket and surrender the vault key, or hang for treason.
Aurelion effectively orchestrates a hostile takeover where the target company's board of directors is forced to fund their own acquisition.
Exactly. Varric is suddenly working 18-hour days to repair the treasury he spent a decade draining. Aurelion gets a hyper-competent, thoroughly broken chancellor, and he acquires the treasury without spilling a single drop of blood.
It really makes you think about the Lord Varrics in your own office, or your own industry. The people who hold immense power simply because no one has ever audited their daily workflow.
The moment someone applies a rigorous system of accountability, that entrenched power just evaporates.
So true. But once Aurelion neutralizes that internal threat, he realizes that just surviving day one isn't enough. He has to build a system that outlasts him, which means moving from crisis management to permanent empire building.
And his biggest obstacle there isn't a villain. It's the rightful heir, Prince Julian.
Right. Julian is a nice kid. He writes poetry, he cares about the peasants, but in the wake of a near collapse, Julian is a time bomb.
If you put a soft, poetic king on the throne, The surviving corrupt lords will just carve him up the moment Aurelion turns his back. Julian absolutely cannot handle the weight of the crown.
So Aurelian decides he has to take the crown for himself. But again, he does it through structural manipulation rather than a bloody coup. He indefinitely delays Julian's coronation, citing security concerns.
Convenient.
Very. And then he transitions his own title from a temporary high arbiter to king consort and eternal regent by doing something pretty drastic. He marries the 35-year-old dowager Queen Alara.
He just inserts himself directly into the royal bloodline.
Exactly. But he knows that marrying the queen isn't enough to govern an entire fractured state, so he engineers what he calls his grand unified theory of governance. He utilizes 3 specific women to isolate the pillars of state power so they can never combine against him.
It's brilliant systems theory applied to human beings. Let's look at the architecture of this triad. First, you have the anchor, which is Queen Alara.
Right.
She provides the historical legitimacy, the noble bloodline, and the legal tie to the throne. She is the public face of continuity.
It's literally like a modern corporate org chart, right? He's isolating HR, PR, and security so they can't cross-pollinate, like diversifying a portfolio to mitigate risk.
That's a great way to put it.
Because next, he establishes the I, or the social proxy, Princess Sophia. She's this cold, highly pious pragmatist from the northern provinces. Aurelian orchestrates a marriage between her and the poetic Prince Julian, and then he basically exiles the 2 of them to the West Reach province.
Officially, they are sent there to practice ruling in a safe environment. But unofficially, Sophia acts as Aurelian's warden and spy.
She manages the prince's image, she keeps the commoners happy with this traditional romantic royal narrative, and she ensures Julian never develops a power base of his own.
She manages the social and religious influence of the state, but far, far away from the capital. And then there's the third pillar, the hammer. Princess Isolde.
Isolde is wild.
She really is. She's a warrior from the neighboring Iron Duchy, which has the strongest military on the continent. She literally rides into the capital with heavy cavalry, threatening war, because Aurelian rejected her as a bride for the young prince.
Notice how Aurelian handles this highly volatile, heavily armed threat, right? A medieval king might try to fight her, or maybe appease her with gold.
But Aurelian looks this furious warrior princess right in the eye and tells her the absolute truth. I didn't choose you for the prince because I have an eye on you for myself.
It is such an audacious move. He recruits her to be his grand marshal and secondary consort. But what really fascinates me is the argument he uses to win her over.
He doesn't try to charm her at all.
No. He tells Isolde that he deliberately compromised his own youth to marry a dowager queen in order to secure the throne's structural integrity. He proves to this hardened warrior that he builds his empire on cold necessity, not ego or romantic sentiment.
But treating love, tradition, and marriage as mere variables in an equation, he earns her deep, pragmatic respect.
And he successfully merges Oakhaven's newly stabilized wealth with her Iron Duchy heavy cavalry. He has literally separated the state's image, its religious influence, and its military force into 3 distinct silos.
And the terrifyingly brilliant part is that all 3 of those silos report only to him. None of them have the complete toolkit to overthrow him.
But establishing political centralization like that creates an immediate secondary problem. Once you hold absolute power on paper, you have to physically project that power across your territory before the outer provinces realize what you've done and rebel.
Right, political centralization requires physical infrastructure.
Wait.
Which brings us to his massive public works projects.
Aurelian starts building the Imperial Way, which is this massive paved 4-lane highway across the kingdom. He rebuilds the ruined Bridge of Unity. He erects signal towers every 10 miles that use mirrors and smoke for rapid data transmission.
He is basically dragging this medieval society kicking and screaming into the future.
The signal towers are a perfect example of his mindset, aren't they?
Absolutely. Optical telegraphy means that information about a border skirmish or a crop failure reaches his desk in hours rather than the days or weeks it would take a messenger on horseback. In logistics, speed of information is just as lethal as speed of cavalry.
But this is where the narrative forces us to ask some really uncomfortable questions. Aurelian is building beautiful modern infrastructure, but the way he accomplishes it is, well, it's completely ruthless.
Oh, without a doubt.
For instance, the Stonemasons Guild does all the heavy lifting for these roads and towers. When they realize how absolutely essential they are to his vision, they decide to strike. They demand a seat on the High Council and total tax immunity.
Which is a standard labor negotiation. But Aurelian, he doesn't negotiate.
No, he crushes them with market logic. He points to the 5,000 unemployed refugees pouring in from the neighboring merchant republics. He tells the guildmaster, if you want to strike, I have a desperate, starving labor force outside the gates willing to work for half your price. You can build my roads, or you can join them.
He demotes the stonemasons from political partners back to expendable contractors in 30 seconds. It is undeniably brutal, but highly efficient.
And he applies that exact same ruthless efficiency to the nobility. The petty lords in the outer provinces form a lords' rights coalition. They are furious because the new free imperial highway is bypassing their private toll roads, basically cutting off their revenue.
So they start gathering their personal armies to protest.
Right, and a normal king would send the royal guard to crush the rebellion. Aurelian doesn't send soldiers, he sends his silent auditors.
The newly minted Bureau of Accounts.
These auditors just show up at the lords' estates with ink and parchment. They don't make accusations, they don't threaten anyone, they just quietly start measuring land boundaries and counting grain silos.
And through pure data collection, they instantly prove that these lords have been hiding 15% of their harvests to avoid royal tithes, and they've been illegally shifting their fences onto crown land.
The lords realize immediately that the ledger is far deadlier than a sword. Because if Aurelian releases that data, they are guilty of high treason and massive tax fraud.
The terror of the audit is so absolute that the Lords' Rights Coalition just dissolves before they even hold their second meeting.
Which brings me to a major moral crossroads here. Is Aurelian a hero? I mean, he is providing stability, ending famines, and building roads that will elevate the standard of living for generations.
But the price is absolute, terrifying autocratic control. In Aurelian's framework, he is operating in a post-moral space. The infrastructure he builds isn't a gift for the people's joy, it is the logistics of dominance.
Yeah, he explains this dynamic perfectly to his triad of wives. He says, yes, a faster paved road means a merchant's wagon of spice reaches the capital market in a single day. But it also means Aurelian's heavy siege engines can reach a rebel lord's front door in 2 days.
The roads are a weapon of centralization.
And having completely mastered the interior of his empire through that centralization, Aurelian is forced to face his final test. He has to deal with the outside world, specifically the bankrupt merchant republics, and a really deadly secret regarding the late king's death.
Because early in his reign, Aurelian actually performed a secret autopsy on the late king using his modern medical knowledge.
And he discovers the king didn't die of a natural lingering illness like everyone was told. He was systematically poisoned over 18 months with a slow-acting agent called Kingsbane alkaloid.
But he doesn't act on it immediately. He just files that data away. He hoards information as the ultimate currency, waiting until the optimal moment of leverage.
And that moment arrives when the merchant republics realize they are bleeding money because of Aurelian's new economic monopoles. They send a diplomatic envoy and a quiet attaché to the capital to negotiate new trade terms.
When they enter the council room, Aurelian doesn't look at the trade maps they unroll on the table. He looks at the physiology of the men.
This sequence is so incredible. Aurelian uses basic physiological observation, something completely alien to the medieval court. He notices the quiet attaché has an elevated resting heart rate, roughly 110 beats per minute.
And more importantly, he notices the man's center of gravity is subtly shifted toward his left hip and forearm.
Right, a modern understanding of body mechanics. If someone is concealing a heavy spring-loaded weapon under flowing robes, they can't swing their arms naturally. They have to hold that limb slightly stiffer to prevent the mechanism from firing.
Aurelian instantly deduces the man isn't an attaché. He's a highly trained assassin. He strips the disguise away right there in the middle of the diplomatic negotiation.
His guard sees the man and finds spring-loaded wrist blades coated in neurotoxin, a suicide pill hidden in his collar, and most crucially, a coded cipher key.
And when Aurelian cracks that cipher, he finds that the seal belongs to the northern bank of the Iron Duchy.
The Iron Duchy. The military powerhouse commanded by Princess Isolde, Aurelian's own Grand Marshal and secondary wife. Isolde's father, the Iron Duke, secretly financed the hit.
The merchant republics use his money to hire the assassin.
Now, if you are a ruler and you find out your father-in-law just paid to have you assassinated, you declare war. It is an act of supreme betrayal.
But again, Aurelian operates on cold logic, not wounded pride. He famously notes, "Revenge is an emotional expense we cannot afford."
It's the ultimate political judo move. Instead of a bloody war that would drain his new treasury, he uses the enemy's momentum to fuel his own engine. He uses the cipher key to blackmail the Iron Duke.
He sends a quiet message saying, I have absolute proof of your treason. Instead of executing your daughter and burning your cities, you are going to march your heavy legions to my border, and you're going to build the final stretch of my imperial highway for free, or I will ruin you.
He literally uses the man who tried to murder him as free labor for his infrastructure projects. And he applies this exact same philosophy of extortion when he unravels the internal side of the Kingsbane poison plot.
Right, because the merchant republics didn't administer the poison themselves. They needed inside access.
Aurelion cross-references the late king's private diaries with the treasury ledgers, and he discovers that 3 high-ranking officials in his own palace, Chancellor Mallow, High Priest Valerius, and Mistress Hestia, the queen's personal physician, were all on the Merchant Republic's payroll.
They slowly poisoned the king. These are the people serving his food and managing his health. The betrayal is absolute.
But he doesn't execute them.
No, because executing 3 high-ranking officials creates a power vacuum and a public panic. Instead, he calls them into a room, shows them the irrefutable proof of their treason, and binds them to his will forever.
He takes 40% of the chancellor's private profits. He demands total, unfettered access to the church's secret intelligence archives, and he secures absolute medical control over the palace staff.
He takes the 3 people who successfully murdered the previous king, and he turns them into his own personal, inescapable espionage network.
It is just breathtakingly cynical, but, you cannot argue with the results.
You really can't. So when we zoom out and look at the entirety of this journey, we see a complete paradigm shift. We started with a burnt-out guy in a hoodie facing down a chaotic, treacherous feudal council.
And we end with a master architect who engineered a perfectly centralized autocracy. He replaced the bloody, unpredictable chaos of feudalism with terrifying technocratic efficiency.
He didn't use spells. He didn't forge a magic sword. He conquered a world using forensic ledgers, supply chain monopolies, market manipulation, and a deep understanding of human incentive structures.
And it really forces us to reconsider what power actually is. True power rarely looks like a crown or a charismatic speech. It looks like the person who controls the schedule, dictates the budget, and manages the flow of raw data.
I think that is exactly what makes this transcript so compelling for us today.
Definitely. I mean, think about your own environments, your corporation, your local community board, maybe even your family dynamics. How often do you find yourself exhausted relying on emotional arguments or getting dragged into traditional, loud power struggles?
To offer.
Right. What would happen if you stopped arguing and just performed a silent audit of the facts?
Yeah.
If you just looked at the raw data, the actual allocation of resources, and the underlying incentives, how many conflicts could you solve instantly?
It is a stark reminder that the systems governing our lives are often built on assumptions that crumble the moment they are rigorously measured.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly chilling thought to mull over. If we accept Aurelion's premise, that power truly flows through systems, logistics, and data rather than titles and traditions, who are the invisible arbiters in our modern world.
Who are the people quietly holding the iron ledgers today, managing the algorithms and the supply chains we completely rely on?
And perhaps the more urgent question is this. Are we the ones writing the rules of those systems, or are we simply unaware that we are just line items on someone else's spreadsheet? Something to think about. Because at the end of the day, when you are summoned to the absolute chaos of the real world, you don't need a magical prophecy to survive. You just need to know how to read the data.